more? Subscribe to our main feed on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts for another weekly show on Bitcoin stocks. And check out our newsletter at miningpod.blockspace.media today. Hey, welcome back to the Mining Pod. This is your news roundup, Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining news. We're going to rip right into the episode. We're joined by Matt Kimmel of CoinShares and Colin Harper of Blockspace Media fame. We got a lot on the docket, so I'll do a quick summary of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll jump into it. Of course, as always, our difficulty update with Matt. We'll start off there, and then we're going to talk about IREN overseeing its megawatt capacity. It's a new lawsuit. Then we're going to go over to the Antminer S21 Plus reveal, which at this point, I'm just getting lost on what units we're even talking about these days. Tokenized whiskey with marathons and Anduro. Granbury hates marathon, as Colin puts it. Kind of an update in that whole saga with Granbury, Texas, trying to boot marathon from the area. And then we're going to finish up with a cry corner. A guest of this show very well could be Satoshi Nakamoto. We'll go first to you. I call him shaking his head. He's upset. We'll go to the difficulty update first. Matt.
Yes, at the time of recording, it is October 10th, and we just had a difficulty update. We went up 4% to the dismay of miners. We talked about last week how basically it was expected to be flat, right? But the blocks becometh. And what we talked about last week was the fact that the Hurricane Helen, was hitting the East Coast and that many mining operations basically paused. It doesn't seem to be like there was any catastrophic damage to the actual operations to which they didn't come back online. And in fact, they certainly did, it appears, come back online because hash rate absolutely sort of ripped. And now we're having a pretty strong difficulty increase kind of at the end of the period. Am I missing anything on the read there, guys? What do you think in the last week? There's been some like blocks have just come very quickly.
So I was talking to Matt Lousteau at Giga. He'd listened to one of our roundups where we covered, I think it was 2 weeks ago, it was you and me, Matt, and we had kind of covered the seesawing of hash rate and difficulty. And I had chalked some of it up to the launch of Fractal Bitcoin, which took a lot of hash rate away from Bitcoin, 30 to 40 exahashes worth for a short period. One thing that Matt pointed out is that the Midwest has had unseasonably warm weather later in the summer and in the early fall. And he thinks that there might have been some curtailment that also impacted hash rate in the region. So shout out to Matt Lousteau. I don't know if that's true, but that is one theory he posited. So maybe that's affecting it. And now that things are cooling down, miners are revving back up, less curtailment happening. So who knows?
Bitcoin miner Iris Energy accused of overstating data center capacity in lawsuit. The lawsuit claims that Iris Energy, they're formerly known as Iris Energy, but now they're IREN, knew or should have known that its Childress County site in Texas was a poor fit for HPC. Jump on into that one.
Yeah, it is Bitcoin mining lawsuit season, it seems. Had the Swan lawsuit drop. We're about to cover another lawsuit as well after this one with Mara and the town of Granbury. I found this, and I just kind of saw it today, actually. I find it interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, IREN is pushing for retrofitting data centers for HPC and AI load. They're one of the few miners doing that, including Core Scientific. And we have had a few guests on the Mining Pod. I've also talked to some people in the background about this, and there's still a lot of doubt as to whether or not pulling this off is even possible. Now, IREN already has revenue. They booked I think $680,000 for last month for their AI and HPC business line. So they're obviously there are customers there. They are providing these services and they're reporting that revenue. So I would find it hard to believe that there's no chance that they could retrofit, but it seems like these investors are suing them, saying that they overstated their ability to specifically retrofit their site in Texas, the Childress site. Going to be keeping an eye on this, whether or not this will actually be fruitful for the people suing them. I don't know if the plaintiffs actually have a case here. Not a lawyer, no idea where this is going to go. I do think it is interesting to contextualize with the AI revolution with these Bitcoin miners, though, right? I mean, I've come back to this 1,000 times. There are a few different ways they could pull this off. Retrofitting is the highest reward, but also the highest risk because no one's ever done it before, right? So I think this will be a story to keep our eyes on and could be decisive in terms of, setting expectations for whether or not Bitcoin miners can retrofit their facilities in the first place for HPC. So not too many takes outside of that. I think that's interesting. And, these miners are kind of getting sued all the time by people. If you go through there, seriously, if you go through like 10 Qs from a lot of the leading public miners, you'll see like random lawsuits that crop up. So, but this one is topical, I think, given all of the HBC news. So,
Few thoughts on this. I'd say like Core Scientific is also doing the retrofitting, but they put a bunch of money into it. And that was the center of this conversation, which I will add to screen for those watching, which is a Coal Paper Research short in July where they described Iris Energy as a Prius at the Grand Prix, basically showing up to the HBC scene and not really being able to compete because it doesn't have the engine under the hood to compete with the hyperscalers. This short, I think they closed it out at this time, but there's still like a few tweets from the Culpeper team taking shots at Iris Energy over the last few weeks. And I think if you're interested in the anti case for IREN, go give us a read. It is pretty interesting. The fundamental thing here, right, is like, can you turn a Bitcoin mining site into an HPC AI site? And IREN is saying we can take our pre-existing infrastructure, our air cool sites, and turn them into AI HPC. And then we can also use like these really cheap energy contracts to capitalize on that in a way hyperscalers can't. And the Culpeper team and then people who are short or just neutral on Iris would say, no, you can't do that. The costs are so significantly different. The Yeah, I'll leave it there for Matt for any thoughts you have. I will say like the numbers are quite different. We're looking at 15 to 20 million dollars per megawatt for a build for HPC versus Irene's estimates are like in that more traditional $1 million range for Bitcoin mining.
You guys really covered a lot of what my thoughts were on this story. I think you hit it on the head, Will. The question is, it is kind of hitting broadly a bunch of different companies right now. Can you take a mining site and turn it into an AI HPC site? And at what cost? Can you do it profitably? And yeah, that's the ultimate question. To Colin's point, lawsuits. It seems like one of the major winners in the mining space are the legal teams. Like
many such cases around the world.
Lawyers be winning.
One more thing, just to contextualize IREN's mining and HPC business. Their pilot contract was with a company called Poolside. That lapsed in August. In their last update, and I cover this on Blockspace with the most recent Mining Pod newsletter, their Poolside contract lapsed. They claim to have 10 others in the pipeline, but they have not disclosed who that's with. And that's really the biggest question here is if you have a small HPC footprint, can you actually broker deals? Tom Massaro of Cathedra, formerly Kungsleden, said that actually the smaller players have an edge in some cases because they can tap into clients that are not big enough for the hyperscalers. So there's a consideration there. But it really does call into question. You have IREN kind of piddling around with some of these smaller contracts. Core Scientific has booked, if the revenue is fully realized and the contract is completed the way they say it's going to be, $2 billion worth of deal flow with CoreWeave over the next, I think it's 5 to 10 years. I don't know the exact date, but I do know the $2 billion mark is more or less in the right ballpark. It's just a completely different level. I mean, they're trying to build out 382 megawatts worth of HPC. So lots of questions as to whether or not the small guys can keep up with something like that.
Okay, let's go over to the Miner Mag, our friends as always. Bitmain rolls out S21 plus Bitcoin miners boasting 15 joules per terahash efficiency. S21 marks the newest addition to the Antminer S21 product line. So this announcement was at Bitcoin Amsterdam, which is closing today. We're recording this Thursday afternoon. I believe that they just closed the event for the week. Looked pretty successful. But they rolled out these new units. with a lot of hashtags and emojis on their Twitter page. They're pretty baller sites or units. Colin, I want to get your thoughts on this. The thing that stood out to me was one, I'm getting confused where we're at in the S21 series, and two, these have slightly higher, meaning less efficient joules per terahash than the other S21 units that we saw come out over the summer, and only by a little bit, by a few joules per terahash. But wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is pretty common. Every time Bitmain gets a tape out from TSMC and they release a new series, the wafers that they get have different calibers of chips in the wafers. Not every chip is the same. Sometimes they allocate the best chips towards their most efficient models, and vice versa for the least efficient chips in an individual tape out. Few things. This reminds me of a newsletter that we had a while back. Talked to some people in the ASIC trading business, and they said that what they were seeing on their side is that miners are getting hesitant to purchase new S21 units because they're thinking in a few months there's going to be another unit out. To your point, Will, we're kind of getting lost and kind of dazed by all of these new S21 units. And it seems like this series and this new generation of Antminers, Bitmain has continued to push new units out faster than they have in the past. And our source for that newsletter a few weeks ago, or maybe it was about a month ago, they basically said miners are hesitant to purchase them. Bitmain's having trouble moving units because miners don't want to buy the S21 and then see the S21 Pro and then the S21 Plus and then the S21 XP come out within the months following, right? A lot of miners actually had to have their S21 orders upgraded to the S21 Pro because they raised such a ruckus with Bitmain and were pissed off at the fact that they had just bought the latest generation machine only to see a new one superseded a few months after. I talked to some other people. I talked to Taras of Syntech, who said that he didn't see Bitmain having any problems necessarily moving units. So maybe my source was seeing a different part of the market that is more hesitant. But at the end of the day, I do think that this rapid succession of increasingly more efficient miners kind of creates a difficulty for Bitmain to move some of the supply and frustration from the mining side. It does seem, just to highlight that point, that the S21 series has had a rapid succession of models being released, and the efficiency gains aren't too crazy. But even if it's like 1 joule per terahash and the price is a little bit lower because the market's lower from where it was when they bought the S21, that's a big deal to miners buying pallets of these things. So it's just kind of some thoughts on that.
It is a big deal. We'll see how that kind of shakes out. I mean, I think Bitmain continues to dominate that side of the industry, and people are having a hard time catching up. I would like to get some more brokers on the show maybe soon. Trying to have salespeople on, but give them a little feel for where people are thinking going in 2025 would be interesting. So maybe Colin and I will chat about that. Matt, any thoughts before we move on to our last section? Actually, we have 2 more sections. What am I talking about? We got tokenized whiskey and marathon still.
It's just amazing that the ASICs keep getting better. Like early when I was growing up in this space, it was commodifications. Just
back in my day.
You know what I mean, though? That was like a often said thing. ASIC commodifications right around the corner. It was right up there with hash rate derivatives, are right around the corner. But the machines, they keep getting better and better. And honestly, good on the miners for basically catching on and adapting and realizing that they could wait until the next model comes out before they upgrade, or maybe just see that their ROI period pays off and kind of adjust their forecast before going on and kind of yeeting themselves into the next large CapEx spend. But we shall move on. Those are pretty much all my thoughts there.
In the competitive world of Bitcoin mining, one name stands out: CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. At CleanSpark, efficiency isn't just a goal, it's our standard. Our sophisticated facilities are built and led by expert teams who care about Bitcoin and the communities we work in. Scale? We've mastered it. Our large-scale operations have set us apart in the industry as examples of community-oriented building. Our track record speaks for itself. We navigate the complexities of the new economy with precision and with skill, continuously achieving operational milestones. Curious about how we do it? We invite you to discover the story behind CleanSpark's success at cleanspark.com.
Okay, let's dig into this story from Marathon. Marathon launched Anduro. It's a L2 platform, a merge mine platform. Sort of uses Marathon Pool's own hash rate to be able to facilitate different expressive protocols and projects on top of Anduro in that merge mine sidechain. Probably a few words we could argue over there and like what that actually means, but we're gonna set that aside. Essentially, they have come up with a tokenization platform, and they're starting with Whiskey. According to CoinDesk, Anduro has developed the real-world asset RWA project Avant alongside tokenization platform Vertilo, and they will tokenize whiskey barrels in a pilot project. RWAs, for background for listeners, has long been a big project within crypto where we take real world things like gold or silver or commodities like oil. I've even seen railroad contracts, tokenize them, and then enable them to be traded in a more frictionless way through like Uniswap or just like a MetaMask wallet. Now, the downside to all these things, of course, is like if we're supposed to have permissionless money and permissionless tokens, and it's tied to this asset that is in a very physical place, that seems to not quite work. And so people have always wondered about that regulatory side of things and the legal side of things. And then also, I just don't think like a lot of people care about this stuff because at the end of the day, people buy tokens that have meme potential and go up 99% or go up 100x. And a barrel of whiskey, it's great, but it's probably not going to 100x.
It's like, what problem is this solving though, right? Like with Bitcoin, you're solving trust issues and transferring money. I mean, is there really a trust issue when buying, like when, if someone's going to buy a barrel of whiskey or if someone's going to buy a pint or a gallon of whiskey, if you're like a bar and or whatever, and you're buying them, like, do you really have problems trusting whether or not you're going to get that delivered? Do you really need a blockchain to facilitate the transfer of that asset and represent it? It just, like you said, Will, this has been talked about ad nauseum probably since like 2016, the tokenization of the world. And unless there is friction or a level of trust that you need to obviate in that transaction, there's no reason to do this. So it seems like Marathon's trying to spin up use cases for Anduro, which makes sense. They want transaction fees to increase on the platform, but I don't really understand what this does.
Matt, give the steel man for it.
Well, I'll say the classical example. The classic example of a successful real world asset project, even though it wasn't called it at the time because that jargon didn't exist, is Tether, right? Which basically custodies treasuries, different cash and cash equivalents, and basically issues a dollar token on different chains. And why has that been so successful? Well, dollar assets aren't easily attainable in many parts of the world. And so what it is basically doing is saying, all right, well, there are chains out there, whether you trust that they are secure and kind of the counterparty risk of the chain is relevant to you is a separate discussion, right? And the counterparty risk of the issuer Tether and whether they will actually be solvent and basically create and redeem these assets in a way that doesn't lead themselves to bankruptcy and lose the tide to the dollar peg of the actual token that they're issuing. All of that stuff aside, right? What these chains are doing is they are available on the internet globally. And so if you are in a place where you're willing to accept those risks and you don't have an alternative access to any of those assets, then you can go get USDT and you can move dollars around. You can hold it alongside your local currency, which may not be doing well from an inflation perspective, right? Or maybe there's really high restrictions on what you can do from a capital controls perspective. So I will say that's kind of the case. Now, let's bring that to whiskey, right? And think about this for a second. And Yeah, I will say, like, the best line of this article, to me, and I hope you guys share in the excitement for this. It says, quote, this is a CoinDesk article, quote, Anduro wants to avoid taking a real-world asset play that exists on the Ethereum and Solana blockchains and simply cut and paste it to Bitcoin, but instead it is looking to offer something that, quote unquote, a Bitcoiner would understand. And this is a product lead for Anduro, which leads me to believe, gentlemen, that Bitcoiners love whiskey. Is that the
Yeah.
large takeaway from this article, and that that is the selling point. Like the comedy of that aside, why is Marathon doing this merge mind side chain and this project, which the success of which, we can certainly debate. They want to like try to make extra money, right? It's like, why were people participating in the merge mind fractal ecosystem where you could basically profit off the degen activity? It's a money play. Miners are mercenaries. They're going to go wherever the cash flow takes them. I don't know if this will actually bring another revenue stream to Marathon. I'm not trying to argue that, but I think broadly that is kind of the point of this. What do you think?
I think like the idea of DeFi giving access to new markets is big. We do live in the world of TikTok and YouTube where you can find out about new things. And the fact that you can just go in and invest in those. So, say you get really interested in whiskey and you're like, how do I invest in whiskey? And now you can like invest in this tokenized whiskey project. That's a cool idea. Now, the question for us Bitcoiners is like, okay, is that actually real? Are you like being gypped? Is there like a bunch of like shenanigans going in the background? And probably yes. But I do like generally support the idea of DeFi and having permissionless assets on chain because it does open the world up to more investments as opposed to like I need my Schwab account and I need to have a US bank account and it needs to be like regulated by FDIC and all these other government agencies. That being said, from a mining standpoint, like we've seen these projects try to exist before in ETH world, and they just haven't really gone anywhere. Like the one that comes to mind is MakerDAO. They've tried to onboard RWAs for their stablecoin project and basically use RWAs as collateral for stablecoins. And like it really hasn't gone anywhere besides
The
maybe like
liquidity's terrible for that, right? That's why the USDC and other stable coins are like what the majority
just a
of major
pain,
house backing. Yeah.
it's a pain to onboard like whiskey barrels for collateral. It's just
Well,
like an odd
also
thing
the
to
other
do.
thing too is like maybe for a derivative contract, tokenizing it makes sense. But I guess my question is like, I bought three whiskey barrels and they just sit there. As you know, like, do I get custody of the whiskey barrels? What am I putting? What am I buying here? And then on the other
Yeah.
side, if you're actually using the underlying commodity, i.e., whiskey, in your business, do you need the token to facilitate that transaction? I don't
Yeah.
think you do. Sorry, not to.
Yeah, and I mean, typically you don't trade kind of manufactured goods, maybe the underlying commodity, like the grain that kind of goes into the whiskey, like that's kind of
Right.
often in the futures market and things like that. But I will say, like, I'm going to zoom out for a while. It has long been discussed in the Bitcoin ecosystem, basically how to have much greater financial activity settle down into simple peer-to-peer transactions, right? And so it's the question has kind of often been, do we recreate everything within this kind of new alternative monetary system, or do we somehow try to doctor the existing financial ecosystem to kind of stack on top of it and have much more complex financial transactions basically boil down into simple peer-to-peer transfers? And the verdict on that is totally unknown. But like, what is this platform and its example where they're kind of just trying to create an asset and see if that works from a, again, counterparty risk perspective, if it actually makes sense and people use it, if there's a market for it. But eventually, I would hope, if this is really going to be a globally adopted system that everything stacks on top of, we will figure out at some point how to bring debt, equities, general commerce to the Bitcoin space. How we do that, I don't know. Maybe Bitcoin Season 2 will talk about it, Will. I don't know.
Oh, another show from Blockspace Media, Bitcoin Season 2. I think last thing I'll mention on this is Marathon has been really putting a lot of money this cycle into different revenue lines, whether that be Anduro, whether that be Slipstream and like ordinals. And then they have like this big crypto, Bitcoin, global climate change thing that they're working on really hard. And now they're doing like the marathon, Michael Saylor play. So they got a lot going on, like a lot of different themes and narratives for marathon. And this is just yet another one. Let's go ahead.
Speaking of themes for Marathon, the next
Speaking
story.
of which, really good transition there. Let's pull that one up.
The city of Granbury, Texas hates Marathon, is how I wrote this in the show notes.
Just rip on it, Colin. Just rip it.
Yeah, so a Texas town in Granbury, Texas is suing Marathon Digital for its mining facility nearby causing a nuisance. There's been some prior reporting from Time on this. There was a huge hit piece against Mara. Now, Marathon purchased this facility from Hut 8. It was part of the USBTC, was managing it after the Celsius bankruptcy a few years ago. Hut 8 USBTC merged. Marathon had like a majority of their hash rate there. They ended up just purchasing the site, or they had most of the capacity there. They ended up purchasing the site from Hut 8. Now, the lawsuit claimed, according to this Cointelegraph article, that some residents have suffered sensory, emotional, psychological, and health impacts due to constant, unrelenting noise and vibrations from Marathon site. It added that some locals have experienced fatigue, headaches, memory issues, hearing loss, migraines, and tinnitus. The group also alleged that pre-existing health conditions such as high blood pressure have worsened for some residents. Quote, even in their own homes, residents can hear Mara's crypto mine's noise and feel its vibrations, the suit claims. It said Marathon site substantially interferes with plaintiffs' members' private use and enjoyment of their properties. Now, two things. I just want to say something right out the gate. Noise pollution for crypto mines is a big thing, and it should be managed. And I don't want to dismiss any legitimate claims about it disrupting people's lives. There have been numerous stories all across the U.S. of miners coming in, buying up some land, deploying, and they don't think about it. And it's noisy, and people get pissed off, right? And then it causes a whole problem for everyone. Bitcoin gets a bad rap, yada, yada, yada. That being said, making claims that people's blood pressure and they're getting headaches and fatigue because of a Bitcoin mine, especially one like the Granbury mine's like pretty far removed. I think like Time did a decibel reading and tried to claim that like as far as 10 miles away you could hear it. I've talked to operators and Bitcoin miners. That is almost demonstrably nonsense. Like there should be no way that those decibels reach a 10-mile, span from a mine even this big. So a little bit skeptical of this. Noise pollution, not good. Hopefully that's, Marathon's got that under wraps. Some of the other claims here of like severe and deleterious health impacts, I find that hard to square, but I don't know if y'all have other opinions here.
My blood is boiling just thinking about it. So
He's upset. I mean, isn't a follow-up from the Time magazine piece from a few months ago? This has been ongoing, and now we have a lawsuit. So it's good to check in with this one. I believe Marathon went ahead and swapped out a lot of units and put in immersion tanks into this facility.
This is true. That was part of their most recent update. They're working on upgrading to immersion.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it was complete. And this site had a ton of air units, I believe. So it's probably more to do. I've heard both sides. I've heard from people who've been there that if you are near the site, you can't hear it. I mean, it's like a low hum, but it's within like industrial standards. If you are standing right next to the site, of course, it's loud. But yeah, I think we're going to see more of these forever, these regional stories. So I don't have too much of a take on it. Matt?
No, I think Colin covered it well. Let's push to the last one.
Which push to the Cry Corner. Okay, so we had a lot of options for Cry Corner this week. We could have talked about Justin Sun becoming the premier of Liberland, a non-recognized country within Europe. That would have been a fun one. We could have talked about the FBI launching its own AI token to track down some nefarious token peddlers.
Pretty fun entrapment scheme.
That would have been a good one we could talk about. But instead, we have to talk about the Bitcoin one, which is HBO releasing this documentary. Let's take a quick listen to the trailer.
Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin, could be one of the richest people on Earth. But many years ago, Satoshi had disappeared, and with Bitcoin being woven into the fabric of the financial system, solidifying its role as digital gold, perhaps the question of Satoshi's identity was more pressing than ever.
Okay, I think we can only play like 15 seconds for copyright reasons. But there you go. HBO put out a new documentary called Money Electric discussing the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto. It came to an interesting conclusion we will get to in just a moment. But really quick, you guys watched this, right? We're not going to give uninformed opinions.
No, I don't have much to comment here other than just the fact that I don't know.
Lame.
Yeah.
Matt,
I
did you
have
watch
time.
it? It's true.
I can neither confirm nor I watched it as much as the answer to the question of who Satoshi was answered.
I watched half of it, and I am going to try to finish it. It was hour and a half, I think. And like as far as Bitcoin documentaries go, pretty well done. A lot like the classic code on screen, dark faces. We don't know who Satoshi is, but they did a good job of interviewing Adam Back, Peter Todd, Rachel Rose O'Leary, former CoinDesk. CoinDesker.
That's nice.
Yeah. So we get some familiar faces in there, which is cool. Obviously, both the people I just mentioned, Adam Back and Peter Todd, have been on the mining pod, so it's kind of fun to see them in a different role there. The problem with this, which everyone came to, is they named that Peter Todd was Satoshi, and there's lots of problems with that. What did you guys think about the reaction over the last few days after that was announced or released? Don't jump at the question.
You go ahead, Matt.
Okay. There's never a dull moment in this industry. And I think that as a community that is so online, right? It was just perfect to just it's like throwing a little bit of bread into a pond that is just swimming full of fish. Everyone just attacked on this right away. It was like, no way, Peter Todd is Satoshi. And there was like basically a ton of evidence as to why. And it's like, I don't even know how much I think HBO was even confident in their answer, or if they just saw like a ripe market to get a lot of attention from. Because I think they make money off of this, right? Mm-hmm. And that they're like getting a lot of views. And some people may have subscribed to HBO Max literally just to watch this. But that's a good point. Peter's reaction was great. There's like a video circulating around basically where the documentarian came with her camera and was like, you are Satoshi, and he's just laughing at him. Yeah. Back next to him is also just laughing at him.
Yeah. So great.
But yeah, difficult to basically come into a space full of people that largely identify with this project, right? So many people identify with Bitcoin and make it a part of who they are. And so many people are obsessed about this mystery. One of the greatest mysteries I think out there is who is Satoshi Nakamoto. And to think that HBO was going to come in and spend their money and basically figure it out, was ambitious to say the least. And the results are not surprising.
I think you're right, Matt, that the splash value is what they're going for here. And there's kind of plausible deniability, right? You can kind of throw out, this is Satoshi, but there's no real way to prove it unless Satoshi were to sign a message with their original address. And most people don't know that outside of Bitcoiners, right? And some Bitcoiners might not even know that. So there's like an information asymmetry there to where your audience, most of them aren't going to know that. So they're not even going to know that there's a way to definitively prove this. But that's not really mentioned probably in the doc. And at the end of the day, yeah, they have the cover of being like, this is who we think it is, but there's no real way to tell. So here's our guess. And last thing I will say about the reaction, I think, people being like, oh, it can't be Todd. He was 15 at the time. If you do like semantic analysis of Satoshi's post versus Todd's, the writing styles are completely different. I think that's probably the strongest argument, because you could make the argument that, well, he's trying to change the way that he writes so that it might, obfuscate who he is. But Satoshi was prolific online. There's no way he's always going to be able to alter. He's not always going to be thinking about that, right, when he's writing. So all that being said, the reaction of people being like, oh, it's not Todd was interesting to see. Like you said, there's kind of this groundswell and grassroots movement to be like, no. The other thing that I think was really important too with people's reaction to this, though, it's almost like in the religion of Islam, where you're not supposed to show depictions of Muhammad. It's like it's taboo to even try to address this at all. Like doxing Satoshi for the Bitcoin community is no. It's a big sin. And I think that was a lot of the reaction too that you saw from Bitcoiners, is like, irrespective of whether or not we think it's Todd, why are you doing this? We don't want to know. Like Charlie had a good tweet about this. It's like, ultimately, you shouldn't want to know that. And if you're trying to figure that out, you need to stop and reflect why you're trying to figure it out, because it has probably more to do with you trying to make a splash rather than arrive at some sort of truth, right? So
Colin always brings the good rants, so I don't have much more to add to that. Maybe go check it out. Also, go check out other Blockspace Media podcasts. We'll wrap up here, guys. So we got Bitcoin Season 2. This is the second podcast that Colin has done today. So go check out Bitcoin Season 2. You can find it on all the different podcasting platforms. And then we'll see you guys next week. We have, honestly, I forget what show we have for next week, but I'm sure it's good. It'll be out on Tuesday. But from us at Blockspace Media, we'll see you guys next week.
Have a good weekend, y'all.
Interested in Bitcoin scaling, startups, or learning more about Bitcoin Softworks? Join us Saturday, November 9th at the Fidelity Center in Boston, Massachusetts for Op Next, a one-day conference on scaling Bitcoin hosted by Blockspace Media, the producers of this podcast. Join Bitcoiners like Peter Todd, Portland Hodl, and more to discuss various Bitcoin proposals like OpCat, the Great Script Restoration, CTV, and more. Attend workshops, speaker sessions, and panels discussing the latest in scaling tech, from ZK to ARC to Bitcoin Softwork history. And for a limited time, use code OCTOBER to get 25% off a general admission ticket. Find out more by visiting opnext.dev. Again, that's October at opnext.dev. You can find out more by checking out the show notes below.